Cambodia is currently at the center of a deep political crisis. Protests are happening one after another, with people taking to the streets, demanding democratic rights and freedom. But they're up against a government that's determined to hold on to power at any cost. Backed heavily by support from China, the Cambodian government is using every means to silence the voice of the people. This isn't just happening in Cambodia. It's a story that's unfolding in many parts of the world. These protests are part of what's known as the Color Revolutions, a political movement that originated from the democratic struggles in Eastern European countries after the fall of the Soviet Union. In Cambodia, the Color Revolution is not just a protest against injustice, but also an expression of hope that one day the country will have a more transparent and democratic political system. However, like in many other places, the Color Revolution in Cambodia is facing a major challenge: strong repression from the government, backed by financial and military support from China. The Hun Sen regime has not hesitated to use violence and repression to maintain power, making the struggle of the Cambodian people more challenging than ever. To better understand the oppression that the Cambodian people are facing, we need to look back at the historical lessons from China, where the brutality of its leaders has left a deep impact not only on the country itself but also on the world. Welcome to the channel. Today, we'll dive into a gripping and sensitive topic: from the repression in China to the ongoing Color Revolution in Cambodia. These events not only highlight the cruelty of authoritarian regimes but also showcase the strength and hope of movements fighting for freedom and human rights. We have a suspicion that the bosses of the Chinese Communist Party might not be too fond of our videos about China, which might be why they don't appear much in the algorithm. So, if you could take a second to hit the like button below this video, it would help us tremendously in getting past YouTube's algorithm, especially when we're exposing the Chinese Communist Party. And now, let's get started. China in the 1960s, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, entered a dark period in its history, the Cultural Revolution. This was a brutal purge aimed at preserving Mao's ideology and eliminating what he saw as counter-revolutionary. The goal of the Cultural Revolution was to reassert Mao's power and eliminate anyone perceived as a threat. Millions were persecuted, and thousands of cultural relics were destroyed. Mao mobilized the masses, especially the youth, through the Red Guards to carry out a comprehensive purge aimed at eradicating counter-revolutionary elements in society. These attacks targeted not only individuals accused of being counter-revolutionaries but also the entire cultural and heritage fabric of China. Historical sites, temples, and classical literary works were destroyed. Anything that did not align with Mao Zedong's ideology was brutally eliminated. The Cultural Revolution created a society where trust between people was eroded. Millions were forced to denounce their friends, relatives, and even their own parents. The sight of loved ones being dragged out in public, humiliated, and tortured was not only physically painful but also a profound spiritual and moral destruction. Mr. Le Wen, a survivor of the Cultural Revolution, recounts his story. His family, once respected intellectuals in the village, became targets of the purges. His parents were arrested, beaten in front of the neighbors, and ultimately executed on charges of being counter-revolutionaries. Le, just a boy at the time, had to witness these horrific scenes. He shares, "It was a time when people lost their humanity. Everyone lived in fear, not knowing who would be the next victim. But it wasn't just the people who suffered. China's rich cultural heritage, thousands of years old, was systematically destroyed. Temples, shrines, libraries, and art were burned or transformed into symbols of communism." This wasn't just about physical destruction, it was about wiping out the collective memory and identity of an entire nation. The Cultural Revolution left China spiritually and materially depleted, with millions dead or scarred for life, and thousands of cultural treasures erased from history. This event is not only a deep scar in China's history but also a lesson on the brutality that authoritarian regimes can inflict when their power is threatened. Fast forward to the 1980s, and China was again grappling with political and social unrest. Under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, the country witnessed the tragic events at Tiananmen Square in 1989. The protests at Tiananmen weren't just about democracy, they were a cry for change from students, intellectuals, and workers fed up with corruption and injustice. They hoped for a better future, one where political reforms could match China's rapid economic growth. For weeks, protesters gathered at Tiananmen Square, believing the government would listen to them. Young, passionate students gave speeches, called for reforms, and demanded transparency and fairness. They envisioned a new China, where people could live freely and with dignity. But instead of dialogue, the government chose violence. On the night of June 3 and into the early hours of June 4, 1989, the military was ordered to clear the square, using tanks and machine guns against the unarmed protesters. It was a night of terror, where cries for help were drowned out by the sound of gunfire and the rumble of tanks. This brutal crackdown left hundreds, possibly thousands, dead. One image from that night became iconic: a lone man standing in front of a column of tanks, a symbol of the courage and resolve of ordinary people facing down the might of an authoritarian regime. Lena, a survivor, shared her memories. When the tanks rolled into the square, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My friends fell right in front of me, and all I could do was run in terror. It's a night I'll never forget. Lena lost many friends that night, and the bloody images of innocent people being massacred have haunted her ever since. The Tiananmen Square massacre left a deep scar on the Chinese people. It was a painful reminder that, despite economic progress, the government was willing to use brutal force to maintain absolute power. But perhaps even more tragic is how this event has been erased from the collective memory of many Chinese people. To this day, the Chinese government tightly controls information about Tiananmen. The media is censored, websites are blocked, and anyone who dares to speak out is silenced. But even though it is controlled, the memory of that night lives on in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The cruelty of Chinese leaders extends beyond political repression. They have also brutally oppressed religious and ethnic minority groups, notably the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and Tibetan Buddhists. Under Xi Jinping, concentration camps have been established in Xinjiang, where millions of Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic groups are detained. They are forced to abandon their faith, subjected to forced indoctrination, and face various forms of torture and abuse. These concentration camps are not only places of detention but also sites of brutal assimilation policies. Uyghurs are coerced into abandoning their language, religion, and culture. These actions amount to cultural genocide as the Chinese government attempts to erase an entire ethnic identity. Ula, an Uyghur survivor of the detention camps, shares his experience. I was detained without clear reason. They forced me to learn Mandarin, abandon Islam, and sing songs praising the Communist Party. Every day was a nightmare, and I didn't know if I would survive to tell this story. Ula is one of the few who managed to escape the concentration camps, but his family still has many members detained with uncertain fates. In Tibet, the Chinese government continues to impose strict control over religious activities. Tibetan Buddhist monks face repression, temples are monitored, and Buddhist culture is under severe threat. Many monks have self-immolated to protest this oppression, but their voices have been forgotten in the silence of the international community. On July 20, 1999, under Jiang Zemin's leadership, Falun Gong, a spiritual practice, was brutally persecuted. Millions of Falun Gong practitioners were arrested, tortured, and even killed in a campaign that many international human rights organizations have condemned as spiritual genocide. Wang Lan, a Falun Gong practitioner, recounts her experiences in detention. They beat me every day, forcing me to abandon my beliefs. I witnessed many people tortured to death, but I could do nothing to help them. I could only pray and hope that one day justice would come. Wang is now living in exile, continuing to fight for her fellow practitioners who are still detained and tortured in Chinese government prisons. Anyone who dares to expose the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party, even just through thought, can become a victim of this brutality. But despite the repression, the voices of the persecuted continue to resonate around the world, calling for the international community's attention. So how does all of this relate to the current situation in Cambodia? The Color Revolution in Cambodia is not just a movement fighting for democracy, it also reflects what is happening and has happened in China. The Cambodian government, under Prime Minister Hun Sen, has received strong support from China. This support not only strengthens Hun Sen's grip on power but also enables the Cambodian government to use similar repressive tactics as those seen in China against movements advocating for freedom. Like China, the Cambodian authorities have not hesitated to use police and military forces to suppress protests, arrest opposition leaders, and limit press freedom. This similarity is not just a result of political influence but also a sign of a repressive strategy imported from China. Somali, a young activist in Phnom Penh, was arrested while participating in a peaceful protest demanding rights for the people. We just want our country to be better, but the government sees us as enemies. I was beaten and held for days just for speaking out. Somali is now living in hiding to avoid further repression, but she continues to fight through social media and international media channels. It cannot be denied that China's economic support has helped Cambodia develop in some areas, but in return, Cambodia has had to pay the price with its freedom and self-determination. China is not just investing in infrastructure but also in politics, supporting a repressive government to maintain stability that benefits their interests. The repression in Cambodia, influenced by China, has created a harsh environment for those who dared to speak out for freedom and democracy. Protesters are beaten, journalists are arrested, and political opponents are accused of treason. But despite the repression, the hope for a free future remains unshaken. China and Cambodia, despite their significant differences in culture, history, and scale, share a common political pattern: authoritarianism and repression. In both countries, we see the use of violence and information control to maintain power. From Mao Zedong to Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and now Xi Jinping, we've witnessed a long line of leaders willing to sacrifice millions of people to protect their authority. Each leadership period comes with its own campaigns of repression, but the common thread remains a ruthlessness and determination to maintain absolute power. In Cambodia, history has also been marked by bloodshed. From the Khmer Rouge era to the modern day under Hun Sen's leadership, the country has endured brutal repression. The similarities in methods of oppression and power maintenance reveal that authoritarian regimes, wherever they are, fear the power of the people. But no matter how harsh the violence, the longing for freedom and democracy of the people remains unquenchable. The color revolutions in Cambodia and the democracy movements in China are proof that people will always fight for core human values: freedom, justice, and human rights. Governments may imprison bodies, but they cannot imprison the spirit of those who struggle. We've seen this in both China and Cambodia, where, despite repression, activists continue to fight with the belief that one day justice will prevail. Both China and Cambodia have experienced tumultuous and painful periods in history. Events like the Cultural Revolution, the Tiananmen Square massacre, and religious crackdowns in China, as well as the ongoing Color Revolution in Cambodia, all demonstrate the brutality of authoritarian regimes in maintaining power. But at the same time, these struggles show the strength and perseverance of people demanding freedom, democracy, and human rights. No matter the extent of the repression, the belief in a better future remains undiminished. History has proven that no dictatorship lasts forever. Repression may persist, but in the end, the light of freedom and justice will always shine through. Democratic movements in China, Cambodia, and around the world are living proof that when people unite for a noble cause, no force can stop them. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found the content useful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our latest videos. Let's spread the message of freedom and justice together.